Thank you to everyone who has come to listen today. I'm Polly, and I'm a member of the Aularian committee, and I've got the pleasure of hosting this TEDdy talk this afternoon. We're going to talk all about artificial intelligence, and we've got a great opportunity today to hear from two people who know a lot more than me, certainly, and a lot about what they're talking about in this field. We're going to have a bit of a conversation, and I'm hoping that we can explore some of the complexities of AI and help frame some of the kind of ethical challenges that can arise when talking about artificial intelligence. In terms of the format, I've got a few questions of my own that I'm going to start with, and we'll try and leave about 15 minutes at the end so that there's an opportunity for everybody to ask questions. If you have got any questions, if they pop up as you're going along, please feel free to just write them in the chat box. And at the end, I'll try and scoop up and we'll try and get through as many as we can. Don't be shy about asking questions. It'd be great to hear from you all. So today I'm joined by Dr. Linda Eggert, who is joining Teddy Hall in September as a tutorial fellow. And I'm also joined by, you'll probably be able to see from our labels, but my contemporary, Michael Basker. The two of us lived opposite each other in the Kelly building back in 2002. It's a real pleasure to have them both along. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And if it's okay, I'll ask you to start, please, Linda.
Sure, thanks so much for having us. My name is Linda Eggert. I'm currently an early career fellow in philosophy. I'm also affiliated with the Institute for Ethics and AI here at Oxford. Previously, I was a fellow at the Center for Ethics at Stanford and at the Center for Ethics at Harvard. I work mainly in moral and in political philosophy, and I'm very much looking forward to starting at Teddy Hall in September.
Thanks, Linda. Michael?
Hello, everyone, and yeah, really fantastic to be here. It's a shame we can't see you all, and because I wonder if there are familiar faces out there. As you can see, I'm potentially not an obvious person to talk about AI in that it has English literature there as my undergraduate course. I've got, quite a strange background for somebody talking about AI. I've been a writer and a publisher ever since leaving university. But my writing and a lot of the publishing took me down various byways into aspects of technology, ended up writing some books about how that impacts society and culture. That then led to working with the AI company DeepMind, which then has led to some various other books. And now I'm doing a lot of work with an AI company, Inflection. So hopefully it's still going to be helpful and useful to everyone. I sort of like to think of myself as perhaps an explanatory bridge between the kind of hardcore computer science and engineering that is actually driving AI and a popular understanding of what it means for us all.
Thank you. I mean, certainly from my perspective, that's exactly how I see you, Michael, because I know you're involved in co-authoring the book, The Coming Wave. And for me, I think having known really very little about AI, that was a really helpful introduction to try and, in layman's term, like a translator. I think I would agree with your analogies there. I just wondered if we could, I know you were just touching on that a bit, but if I could ask you as well, Linda, a little bit about kind of what piqued your interest in AI, how you ended up kind of publishing and working in this area.
Yeah, I think it happened maybe 5-6 years ago during my DPhil, actually, when I was working on moral philosophy and the ethics of war. And it happened in, I think, 2 different ways. The first was through what's known as the trolley problem, which is a very popular thought experiment in moral philosophy. And it was through all kinds of different people who suddenly got interested in thinking about the trolley problem in relation to self-driving cars. And the second way was through philosophers thinking about military applications of AI in the context of autonomous weapon systems, for example.
And can I, just for people like me who might not have so much understanding of that, could you briefly explain a little bit what the trolley problem is?
Oh, sure. So it's a thought experiment, very popular with moral philosophers trying to test certain kinds of moral intuitions when we think about different moral theories, in particular consequentialism and non-consequentialism. And the typical version is that you've got, a trolley on its way, about to run over 5 people, and you can decide whether to divert the trolley away from the 5 to save them towards one person. It's used in a very different context, but then when self-driving cars started entering the picture, people suddenly got very interested in this, and so I kind of followed the thought experiment into this area.
Yeah, there's an obvious kind of logic then, thinking about how do you program a self-driving car. You know, if you're thinking about that kind of thing, how you program a self-driving car with the trolley problem in mind.
That's certainly the thought that lots of people had.
Okay, that's really helpful. And Michael, just in terms of, you were mentioning a bit your kind of how you come in from writing and publishing and you've ended up in that field, but was there a particular moment that drew you over to AI?
Not a sort of particular moment. I mean, I think the pivotal shift for me was when I got an opportunity to go and work with the AI company DeepMind, which is based in London, and it's now Google DeepMind, it's owned by Alphabet, and it is one of the pioneering AI companies, probably the pioneering AI company in the modern incarnation of AI. And DeepMind was doing amazing things. I mean, it's probably, well, maybe best known for creating a system that beat the world's best Go player. So, you know, Go being the board game is exponentially more complex than chess. It's just a kind of truly ridiculous level of different possibilities on every move. And people thought that AI was decades away from being able to beat a human at Go. So yes, you know, obviously in the 90s, computer had beaten the very best human chess players, but Go was just totally different. And yet DeepMind found a way to do this, and they created new kinds of system that, way ahead of schedule. This was, I think, 2016 or 2015 and 2016, way ahead of schedule, beat a human. And then I was there a bit after that. And I think what interested me about AI at the time, and I think interests everyone, is just the sense that this is a huge change. So there's no way that we can kind of sit there and just say, oh yeah, well, this is just like some new exciting device. You know, if AI is in any way what we think it might be and what we think it is, then this is the great story of our times. This is a huge shift that we're going through. And it's odd because now obviously AI is everywhere. You can't open a newspaper without reading about it. And to some extent, there's a bit of a backlash. People are starting to say, oh, hold on, maybe it's all a lot of hype. But I think when you step back and look at it, that just doesn't stack up, because, you know, what AI is doing is it's transforming fundamental aspects of what it means to be human. You know, AI can talk in our language. The language isn't just a sort of little bolt-on extra. It's what makes us human. It's the stuff that our culture, our politics, our relationships, they're formed of language. And language is now automated as the province of machines. And, you know, it was just sort of thinking about some of these things that got me really interested, and just thought, you know, we have to understand this at every single level, because there probably isn't going to be an equivalent technological shift like this again, certainly in our lives.
I mean, when you're talking about that, it really, for me, it's the breadth of what AI is and can do. And, you know, you're talking about the language and the capacity of that. But I suppose just thinking about what that looks like for the day-to-day individual, like how currently is AI, you know, influencing our lives in ways that we might not even realize?
Well, I mean, I guess, you know, the first thing to say would be that machine learning systems just kind of undergird so many other technological systems that people will use every day. You know, helping pick songs that you might listen to, suggest adverts that you get that you see, you know, help route power to cables where it's going to be most efficient, etc., etc. Just kind of countless under the hood examples of where, you know, you've got machine learning techniques and just these, you know, fairly powerful advances in computer science that can just make things work better. And that's kind of one layer. You know, in almost any technology you use now, or sort of consumer technology, or B2B technology. There could be, probably is somewhere down the stack, some kind of machine learning. And then, of course, probably more top of mind for most people is the sort of wave of generative AI systems that are now popping up. And, you know, ChatGPT went from launching sort of December 2022 to becoming the fastest growing consumer technology in history, you know, in the space of a few months. And, you know, that is now probably, I think, at the point where people are still figuring out the exact use cases, but they're becoming clearer. You know, any kind of summarization task, writing task, translating task, coding task is now just very, very automatable. Image generation, music generation. We saw OpenAI debut a video generation tool the other day where you just, in natural language, give a few prompts. You know, you say, I want a video of a whale flying over the Statue of Liberty, and so on. It just creates it.
Wow.
And yeah, it's a funny one because I think there's so much powerful capability out there in all of these generative AI systems, but there's still a sense that there's a slight mismatch between our kind of human use cases that we do every day and what the AI can do. And it's partly that they just don't have the full context of our life. And so many of the tasks that we perform are just deeply embedded in this rich life context. And it's also partly that there's still an error rate, a hallucination rate when they come up with false information or do something wrong. You know, even if it's 1 or 2% in a corporate context, nobody wants to rely on something that's going to go wrong that often. So there are all of these massively exciting possibilities, but still little challenges that mean that the adoption often is kind of less foundational than it might be now.
Sure. So yeah, there's still this huge area of excitement and things that could be done, but because would you say there's a bit of kind of anxiety around it when you're talking about the corporate bodies, you know, the risk of 1% or 2%? And do you think that's kind of anxiety rooted in the systems not being quite good enough yet? Or do you think that's about a lack of knowledge and understanding?
I think probably, well, there's definitely anxiety about it. And I think there's a kind of wider anxiety about it as well, that, you know, people are already kind of relying on the output of AI systems to be true for writing their essays at school. And, you know, it's for sure that all of the students at Teddy Hall now, I imagine there's not one of them that hasn't used ChatGPT or something at some point in their work. I mean, it would shock me if there was. And it's
maybe I'll come back to you, Linda, on that in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certain, you know, and again, like the ship has sailed. Like if you don't want students to ever use generative AI, it's already, I think, too late, and it's really about how it's used. But if people are relying on it to just come up with facts, that's not going to happen. Again, in corporate scenarios, that's an issue. But what the anxiety is real. But what I think a lot of the anxiety doesn't account for is how fast the technology is moving forward. So, you know, now a lot of these systems have retrieval, so they can go to the internet and find a source and then back up whatever it is they're generating with a source and then add a citation in line with the text. So, you know, the AI system makes a claim, it then goes and looks, it finds a Nature paper that supports that claim, and then it posts a link to the Nature paper underneath that claim. It's just getting much better at being grounded, and it's getting much better at finding, you know, really rock solid citations. So today, there are still hallucinations, and even the best systems are essentially at times making stuff up. When they're outputting what they do, they're just coming up with what they think are statistically clever, good things to say. They're not built on any kind of innate truth within the system. But as they get bigger, as they get more powerful, as they get more data, and as they get more capabilities, such as this retrieval and citations, the hallucinations start to disappear. And I think that's the thing with AI, is whatever kind of claims that you make about it one day are, not necessarily going to be true tomorrow, because just the amount of capital pouring into it, the amount of talent that is going into it, the enormous incentives that are driving it forward, all of that means that this is such a dynamic space where the kind of possibilities are constantly moving. Every single day, new products, new papers, new chips, new infrastructure, it's all just piling in. And so there's a lot of anxiety about what it can and can't do. Some of those anxieties are going to prove to be unfounded, and some may prove to be very founded indeed in ways that are already even kind of hard to predict right now.
No, I'm just thinking about you saying, there's that investment everyone's having to look at it. It's always changing. What you're saying today might change tomorrow. Linda, if I can come to you on that, that must be hugely complex as an academic, somebody who's trying to write about the area. And are you finding that you have to really kind of focus on wider debates rather than focusing in on specific technologies then, for example?
Yes, it's really, really difficult to keep up with the speed at which technology is developing. It's also really exciting for philosophers, though, because it does mean that the questions that we've been asking for a really, really long time just remain relevant and just become even more relevant than people have already, thought they were. So questions like, why do we value the real, the authentic? Like, what is knowledge? Why do we care about doing the right thing for the right reasons? Those things are going to stay relevant regardless of how quickly the technology develops. But yes, of course, it's always going to be a challenge. In terms of art, also keep changing. So it's a constant, game of catching up and trying to keep the balance. Absolutely.
Yeah. And just, I also wondered if you had a bit of a comment. Michael was mentioning that he would be amazed if, for example, all the students at Teddy Hall hadn't used ChatGPT in some way, shape, or form. Does that kind of ring true for you? And how are the profession, how are tutors, academics kind of responding to that, I suppose?
Yeah, so the university position is clear, right? So the unauthorized use of AI tools in assessed work is a very serious disciplinary offense. That said, it's not a new thing that people cheat. And some people have also tried to come up with new ways of integrating AI tools into their teaching and rethinking how we assess students. It might depend on the subject. So from a philosophy perspective, we think there's inherent value in writing essays, right? So it's not just about arriving at an essay at the end. We write essays in order to help clarify our thinking, for example. And so to the extent that there's intrinsic value in the struggle of writing, we do lose something once we start, automating part of that process. Now, that's not to say that ChatGPT and similar large language models can't be used in other ways. I think Michael mentioned, they might be great at summarizing stuff, but it might really depend on the different kinds of subjects that we're thinking about, and it might be easier to use or more valuable in certain contexts than others. And of course, you always have to test whatever it spits out. You just can't trust it.
But as a tutor, how would you test that? Have you seen an example where you think that doesn't fit, that doesn't look right, or do you feel like the technology is kind of so advanced that actually it can be quite hard to pick that out?
So it does make up sources. So this didn't happen to me, but I've got a colleague whose student was citing what looked like a plausible sounding handbook, which just didn't exist. And so even sources that sound like existing authors might have written them just might not be real. And that's why we have to tell our students to constantly make sure that what it's actually spitting out is actually real.
Yeah. And am I getting this right, Michael? You were kind of saying that actually the AI is getting better, so that might be happening less and less as things go on. Those sources might become more and more plausible.
Yeah. Because you know, they are going to credible web sources. You know, I would say I'd advise people to go and look at an AI service like Perplexity, for example. So Perplexity is a search engine, and it's kind of Google's nightmare because it's a search engine that combines the functionality of search, which is, you know, getting you relevant links, with a a completely bespoke, customized answer to your query, however kind of obscure and niche. And you know, everyone's had this experience of going to Google and wanting to just ask Google a question in a normal way that you would ask someone a question, and then it just being completely useless at that. Perplexity answers, but the point really about it is that all of the sources that it's coming from, or at least, you know, again, and this is where Linda is definitely right, you know, virtually all of them are good, and, you know, really kind of high quality things that you can rely on. You know, would you want to bet your life or your degree on that?
No.
Probably not at this point, but I think it's very not far off before it is, you know, as good as anything else, you know, any other kind of technological system that we rely on, you know, whether it's a kind of a power grid or an aeroplane or whatever. There's no reason why it won't improve to that sort of level extremely quickly.
When you, certainly in your book, you talk a lot about the revolution, you know, this kind of the significance, and you mentioned earlier on, of AI and the scale of it and what that looks like and what it means. And I wondered if both of you might have something, you know, I think there's a lot of stuff written in the newspaper. I think there's a lot of myths. I think there's a lot of common misconceptions. And I just wondered if you could think about something that you think we're all getting wrong, we're all misunderstanding about AI, but also something that we need to understand a bit better in terms of, like, what should we be perhaps a bit fearful of or a bit worried about? Should I come to you first, Linda?
Sure. I think thankfully lots of the threats are very well understood because so many people write about them. So that's a good thing. Maybe one thing that doesn't come up as often is human-made obstacles to addressing certain threats. So just thinking about autonomous weapon systems, for example, it's been notoriously difficult to define what they even are for a very, very long time. And, you know, you might say that's in certain countries' interest because it's very difficult to ban something that isn't clearly defined. But I think that's one of those examples where human-made difficulties make it very hard to address even threats that are pretty well understood. And so maybe that's one thing that we sometimes underestimate.
So would it, you were saying an example of that would be like weapons?
Yeah, so where we understand the threat that's coming from, you know, say military applications of AI, but the difficulty that comes with addressing that just doesn't come just from the weapon systems, but also comes from, you know, how international politics works, for example, and what is in powerful countries' own interests. So those are very, you know, long-standing difficulties, but it's not like they go away with this new technology.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. Michael, for you, what's something that kind of stands out that you think maybe is a threat that's not been understood properly?
Well, I'd sort of highlight a feature of AI that I don't think is sort of talked about enough, and it's something that we talk about in the book. And I'd very much credit my co-author Mustafa Suleiman, who's you know, big AI entrepreneur. It's really something that he's sort of been thinking about for a long time, and it's both on the positive and the negative, which is that, you know, people think of AI and immediately go to kind of the completely autonomous systems, you know, and there's this kind of very advanced AI where it's almost kind of setting its own goals and then creating strategies to achieve those goals and then executing those strategies. And, you know, that is still a long way off, where it's literally kind of setting its own high level goals. But in the meantime, as we develop with AI, you know, Mustafa's point is that it's just going to be a massive force amplifier for us. So it's going to be something that helps us achieve our goals, whatever those goals are. And clearly, for the most part, that's this kind of amazing thing. You know, if you want to set up a business, well, that's got a lot easier, just as writing your best man speech has got a lot easier, because, you know, not that it just writes your speech, but it gives you ideas, it helps polish it, it helps give you kind of different suggestions of how to go about it. But, you know, pretty soon, much more complex, difficult goals, AI will be a massive kind of booster to helping you achieve that. But then also on the downside, that's a problem, because, you know, it's not like AI systems are going to be just kind of reserved to nice uses. What we're seeing with AI is that what is cutting edge and proprietary and closed source 1 month, literally a few months later, is just totally open source and anyone can download and sort of almost do with it what they will. So, you know, that means bad actors can do whatever they like as well, and their goals will be massively boosted. And, you know, this is, I think, sort of as Linda was saying, it's a bit of a kind of a human problem, in the sense of we have to worry about AI, but we have to worry about what people are going to do with it, rather than necessarily any sort of innate property of that system. And I think that that's an important way of thinking about it that doesn't get enough airtime. You know, it's AI is a kind of empowerment engine, potentially, of all kinds of goals. And it could be for companies, it could be for individuals, it could be for bad actors. And it will be available everywhere because of this diffusion, because of the way it is going open source so quickly. And if you wanted to kind of go with a sort of the classic military thing, is if you think about something like nuclear weapons, they've never really proliferated that far. You know, the actual problem is that building one is extremely difficult. It's extremely expensive. Basically, only a few nation states have ever been able to do it. Now, with the best large language models, they go open source in a few months and anyone can do with them what they will. You know, a large language model is very different from a nuclear weapon, but ultimately AI could be something far more copyable, far more widely diffused than other extremely powerful technologies. And, you know, that creates a problem if it means it gets into the hands of a bad actor of some kind.
So what do we do about that? Can we do anything?
Well, yes, because I mean, and you know, there are so many other sort of little potential problems. But just to go to another thing that I don't think people think about often enough is, you know, the discussion in AI very quickly always goes to things that can go wrong, and, you know, the problems and the dilemmas and the risks. And, you know, I've obviously had countless discussions about AI over the last, I guess, sort of 9 years. And that's what always comes up, and it's the first thing anybody thinks of, and that is probably right and fine, because it is very powerful, it's very new, and it is a very kind of radical concept. But equally, I always think it's worth thinking, what about if we don't have AI? You know, actually, having a really kind of powerful tool like AI is going to be a major part of addressing a lot of the problems that we have. You know, we have a healthcare system that's just creaking and is just getting more expensive and more dysfunctional by the year. We have problems with education. We obviously have, you know, there's a global demographic slowdown. That means there's not going to be anybody to do any of the jobs. We worry about a sort of jobs apocalypse caused by AI. You know, in the long term, there's going to be hardly anyone left of working age compared to the number of people who are hopefully happily retired and relaxing on a beach. There's just so many kind of challenges, even the challenge of just maintaining the same kind of economic growth rate that everyone got used to in the 20th century. That will be far easier if we have AI. So, along with all of the risks, I think it's worth always talking about some of the benefits, and how, if it's used properly, it could be something that supports quality of life improvements, more healthy economic growth, helps address challenges that we know we're going to have to face. So no, I kind of just derailed myself with just a reminder, because it does always kind of fall down compared to the risks. But what we need to do, in a word, to solve the risks or address them. So what we talk about in the book is this idea of containment. That, you know, it's not likely that anyone's just going to kind of stop AI. That the process behind it is sort of too entrenched and too widely dispersed around the world. And there are too many different powerful players pursuing this, from big companies, nation states, academic research groups, and so on, that it's not kind of feasible to just say, hold on, no thanks, we don't want AI. It's just not going to happen. What we need to do is build a contained version of it, which means that humans and societies always have meaningful control over that AI. And this project of containment is pretty much, should be the big project of humanity over the next 20 years. And there's a lot to it. There's no one magic silver bullet that's going to contain AI. Actually, it's about building everything from the right kind of companies to creating the right kinds of culture within those companies, to regulation, to international treaties, to technical safety measures, to audit mechanisms. All of these different things have to come together in this kind of very complex, overarching project of containment, which means we get AI, we get the benefits of AI, but pretty much all of those risks and downsides, and there are a lot of them, are at some level addressed. And it's just a massive, massive challenge that, should be top of mind for sort of every CEO, every leader.
And does that ring true for you, Linda, this idea that actually, there are all these amazing facets to AI, there's all this great stuff to be really excited about, but actually the thing that we really need to focus on is containment and how we bring together, it sounds like we need to, how we bring together the world in a way to do that?
Yeah, in a sense, absolutely. I think there's a few things that I'd emphasize. I think there's sometimes a tendency in public debates to focus on two very different extremes. One of them says, look, all these problems are familiar. There's really nothing new going on here. And at the other extreme, people say, look, there's going to be some super powerful, super intelligence in the future that's going to destroy humanity. But I think one of the things that Michael emphasizes is that there are real problems right now that we need to focus on. Just think about, this information coming from generative AI, for example. The second thing that I'd emphasize is that we really have agency over our technological future. So when, Michael talks about the importance of containment, I think that's absolutely right, because technological progress isn't something that just happens. The book, here it is actually, does a wonderful job of emphasizing the nature of proliferation that, is almost part of the nature of technology. But I think in all of that, it's really important to remember that it doesn't just happen by itself. It all comes down to human decisions, design choices, policy choices, and so on. I think that's really important. And the final thing that goes back to what I was saying earlier about philosophy, I think it's really exciting, not just in terms of the benefits that it can give humanity. It's also really exciting in that it revives certain questions that we might have forgotten to ask, just fundamental value questions about, what is knowledge? What is reality? Why do we care about those things? Questions that philosophers have asked for a really long time. So I think that's one of the things that I actually find really exciting.
And is that something that you kind of really focus on in your work? Like those areas around kind of what is knowledge and what does AI mean for thinking about questions such as what is knowledge?
Increasingly. So even though it started from, coming from certain areas within moral and political philosophy, I think like anyone not indifferent to major challenges facing humanity, I got increasingly preoccupied by, say the nature of reality or the value of democracy and what kinds of decisions we might not want to outsource. So I think like lots of us at the university, you want to be responsive to what's happening in the world. These questions are going to just, keep becoming more and more relevant.
And I know you were mentioning earlier that it would kind of be almost hard to do your job without acknowledging it or thinking about it. Or, it kind of slips in, doesn't it, AI? And I suppose that's what, in a way, that can, when you think about this idea of containment, that's the bit that we need, isn't it? We need people from all disciplines, we need regulators, we need this kind of collective understanding I suppose, the benefits. And also, for me, what feels really hopeful is this idea, actually, we have got these choices, and there is a path that kind of can be taken, but we have to acknowledge that those choices need to be made.
Yes, in a way, it's completely inescapable, just given how many aspects of human life and activity it's penetrated, from our dating lives to criminal justice to university admissions. I think anyone interested in questions of social justice, the future of democracy, is going to find it increasingly difficult to escape questions about the social implications of AI.
And for you personally, what is the one area that you find particularly interesting, or that you feel that people, if you're teaching students, for example, is there something that you particularly enjoy teaching on, focusing on, that gets people looking at AI in a slightly different way?
Yeah, there's lots of them. I think one main question is how we should think about the value of human decision making, and whether we have an interest in not having certain decisions be fully automated. So this is becoming increasingly popular in legal circles, where people talk about the so-called right to human decision. And so I think thinking through the complexities of that is really exciting.
Oh, that sounds really exciting. Yeah. And Michael, is there one thing for you that particularly, I know you're talking about, you gave a kind of broad brush on like lots of things that are exciting and possible, but is there one area that you personally find particularly kind of excited?
Well, I think the thing that I'm sort of looking out for is, and something that we discuss in the book, is this kind of midway point between the sort of AI, kind of generative AI systems, machine learning systems we have today, and then AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, and the point at which AI is sort of comparable to human intelligence across the full spectrum of tasks that human intelligence can do. And, in the book, we talk about something called ACI, artificially capable intelligence, when AI starts taking actions and doing things. What we see at the minute is that AI can't really do things on its own. But already there are tons of people working on this, and it's already becoming clear that probably over the next year, we're going to have AI systems that can take meaningful actions in the world of various kinds, year to 2 years. Some people would argue it's already happening. So what I'm really interested to watch out for is ACI. What form does it take? What's it doing? How does it work? What are the kind of technological pathways that we actually see getting to ACI? What are the companies that are building it, the use cases that it's put to, and so on? I mean, this moment of ACI is actually when we're not just dealing with hot air and hype. It's when AI is having serious kind of consequential impact on our day-to-day life. So that's for me a focus.
Yeah, and that's exciting, but also seems to me fits with this idea of that capability is also just as accessible to bad actors.
Yeah, and I think just like with most things in AI, there's cause for massive excitement and kind of commercial buzz, and also a lot of potential downsides. And it just, in pretty much every area of AI, it does combine all of that, which you just can't really avoid it, because it is consequential and it is unknown, and it something that I've always looked for is all of the historical precedents with technology. And, there are tons of amazing historical precedents for almost anything you care to sort of name. But we really don't have a good precedent for autonomous systems like that. There's not really a perfect thing that we can just draw from. So it is something new. And we don't know exactly how our social and personal systems are going to handle it.
I'll respond to it. Thank you. I mean, to me, it really, even this talk, it's that same thing you write a lot about in your book, this idea of pessimism aversion, which I really could relate to. So this kind of idea that actually when it gets too big or you don't understand it really, you kind of don't even want to go there. And I find myself doing that. I hear these exciting things and I'm just basically picking out the bits that suit me and feel less kind of complicated, because a lot of this stuff is just really hard to wrap your head around. I think if you're not embroiled in the industry, if you are a layperson outside of it, and I also don't get the sense you kind of have that complete understanding of how it is infiltrating. And so in some ways it's easier to hang on to the positive aspects of it. I don't know if you'd agree.
Yeah, I would agree. Sorry, I just got distracted because I was just looking. I suddenly saw there are loads of questions as
Yeah,
well.
I know.
I just suddenly started to look. So I've let my eye wander off the ball. But yeah, the idea of pessimism aversion, I think it is basically true in as much as almost no one. It's just actually not comfortable to think about the magnitude of the potential downsides to what's going on. And, a lot of people who are invested in the area don't think about them. And, this obviously is a problem with technology and tech companies over the last 20 years, is they kind of drunk their own Kool-Aid, and they bought into the myth that they were just going to deliver incredible progress to everyone, and that there were no downsides to what they were doing. And I think actually the field has become a lot better. I think it's very hard to kind of sit there and pretend that that there aren't kind of downsides to technology. I personally think that the upsides outweigh the downsides. And there are many people out there who are now extreme fierce critics of technology, but as we say in the book, they're still quite happy to use a toaster, take a paracetamol, ride on the underground, and so on. Almost no one actually is such a critique that they would live their life in some kind of total isolation. But all that said, I think that there is still an unwillingness within the tech world to fully grapple with what it means to build technology and impact and touch people's lives in kind of incredibly profound and important ways. And that responsibility is huge. And the honest truth is that technologists, tech companies, everyone involved, regulators, us as citizens, all have to kind of confront it without any blinkers. We have to see it really clearly and work out the best way of moving forward.
Yeah, make some informed choices, basically. I know we'll start the questions, but when you were just saying that, I was thinking about kind of these big technology companies. And just before we came in, I was speaking with you, Linda, and you were saying that actually increasingly ethicists are being kind of employed. So there is that recognition that you need to really grapple with these kind of dilemmas and get on board with them.
Yes, and it's great that there's increasing awareness of the importance of paying attention to certain kinds of risks. Sometimes it happens too late, and sometimes I worry that it happens for not entirely the right reasons, you might say. I think there's a broader concern about technocracy, basically. This thought that certain decisions should be left to experts with very special training, typically to optimize for social outcomes. And there's been a lot of talk about democratizing AI, which I think is really important. So I think having the public involved, having people accountable, I think that's going to be increasingly important as well. So it's not just hiring ethicists, whatever that even means. I'm not even sure what that means half the time. I think it's really making the public literate and being way more inclusive and representative of common interests.
Thank you. I'm going to come to the questions because there's quite a few. Some people I think have put in specific names and others are more general. So I'll just, divvy them out unless there's one that you particularly want to take. The first one comes from Derek, and that says, when, if ever, will we have true artificial general intelligence? And that's for you, Michael.
I think it's certainly a matter of when and not if, and I think the answer is, even go back sort of pre ChatGPT, and people would have timelines of anywhere from 10 to 100 years. I think almost everyone in the field now would say it's much closer to 10 than 100 years, and that there are very kind of concrete reasons of why we will have AGI. For example, there's a very powerful scaling effect whereby you make AI systems bigger and they can do more and do it better. And that's been observed. And, some people believe all we need to do is just keep scaling them up and up and up and up. And eventually that kind of gets you to AGI. Whether it requires new kind of conceptual technological breakthroughs or not, I don't know, but I do know that such is the level of interest and the brain power and the money going into it, that it seems really implausible that given where we are now, where we have systems that some researchers say show sparks of AGI, that we won't get to AGI in the next 20, 30 years. That's not super intelligence. That's not kind of godlike AI. That's AGI, human level across the board. But I think we certainly will see that, and potentially a lot sooner than 20 years.
Oh, thank you. The next question has come in from Rupert, and I wonder if this one's appropriate for you, Linda, which says, what do you think are the benefits and challenges for AI in education, specifically in the ability to manage or validate a person's work?
That's an interesting question. I think it really depends on the context. So I was talking to an educator a while ago who was thinking about the potential benefits of combining generative AI when we put together language as well as virtual reality. For example, bringing to life historical figures and having students, talk to like Shakespeare or something. There are some people who are very creative about this sort of thing, and maybe that could be an interesting experience. Now, there's a whole other debate about, those people's interests and whether, that's respectful with regard to historical figures who would be, brought back to life in certain weird ways. And again, I think it really depends on the context, more generally speaking. So it might be fantastic when it comes to summarizing certain texts. Though, again, in those kinds of contexts, people would need to know what's being summarized to test whether the summary is actually accurate. I've tried a couple of times to ask different kind of language models for recommendations for literature, and every time it was completely made up. So even though the authors were real and the words in the titles were plausible sounding, the sources were completely made up. So I think, at least currently, use in the context in which I work is rather limited, particularly when it comes to analyzing work or being creative. But that's not to say that it might be useful in other kinds of contexts.
Thank you. I'm just going to kind of whiz down a few of these and we'll see how many we can get to. Lawrence asks, the industry in which I worked for 40 years, logistics, seems to regard AI coupled with warehouse automation as a panacea, the answer to labour shortages, increasing costs, etc. Is it? Either of you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take it. And the one-word answer, I think, is yes. It basically is. Because it can just make all of that seamless and far cheaper. The difficulty is going to be in the sort of period whereby it's being implemented. And here I will just have a quick historical parallel, which is that, back in, say, the 19th century, every factory worked from a big kind of steam engine and then lots of pulleys and belts that powered the whole factory. And it was all very kind of complicated and inefficient. electricity meant that you could have each bit of the factory plugged into its own bit of electricity, and you could modularize the whole factory. But it took something like 40 years after the sort of rollout of electricity before factories really had, on a very broad-based scale, reorganized themselves. So AI probably is a panacea on all of these things, but there's a kind of messy in-between process where you have to implement it across the board, and where you have to install the systems, the robots, and have the know-how to make it all work. And it's that messy in-between phase that we're going in, where it is going to be hard. But ultimately, yes, for logistics, I think it is a panacea.
You. Bob asks, from what I've seen, there are examples of AI conversations making unvalidated assumptions leading to false conclusions. It gets it wrong. What comment do you have on this? I know we touched on that a bit earlier, but I don't know if either of you wanted to comment.
Sorry,
Mike.
was the question that large language models make false assumptions?
There have been some unvalidated assumptions leading to false conclusions. So it sometimes gets it wrong. So I suppose some of the, to me, we've touched on some of those examples already around, kind of false sources or corporate mistakes.
Yeah, I think yes. The answer is yes. They do make false assumptions. They're not really, they don't make assumptions like we do, where they sort of have a model of the world that is wrong. They're just unspooling tokens, and that those implicitly have wrong assumptions that lead to wrong conclusions. So yes, that's true. And again, I think the key point though is that over the next year, 2 years, you're going to see, or are already seeing, drastic improvements in that, and the error rate is going to go down to near zero, I would say.
I'm just trying to have a quick look. There's a very simple question on here I've seen that because I realized that I probably hadn't picked up to explain that, which is just, what is ChatGPT? So maybe one of you could quickly explain that one while I have a quick look.
Michael, I think you should take this one.
What is ChatGPT?
Yeah.
Well, the simplest way of, ChatGPT is the best known example of a transformer AI system that is out there. And essentially what a transformer does is it takes a series of inputs, a kind of a sequence, and then based on that sequence, it guesses what should come next in the sequence. And so in the case of ChatGPT, it's taking words that we write as an input, and then based on all of this data that it's kind of crunched, it predicts what the output should be. So it's kind of like an autocomplete. If you think of ChatGPT, it's sort of like an autocomplete of whatever you put in, but just the most sophisticated, detailed, powerful autocomplete you could ever imagine. That's probably the way to think about it.
Thank you. I'm just going to pick up a question from John, mainly because he's saying, good to see you, Michael, that you've not changed since 2006. Good sign. He says, transformer-based systems, Mid-Journey, ChatGPT, etc., give plausible responses to prompts based on learning generalization from similar responses to similar prompts in documented human interaction. How do we get new information into this closed loop? Can a model be genuinely inspirational? If so, is the inspiration in the model's response or in the reaction of the human reader?
Well, John, that question in some ways takes me back to my Eng-Lit days, because there's a great debate in English literature about whether the intentions of the author matter at all, and are we actually just kind of making up all of the meanings of any work of art, or indeed any form of text? So strangely, that's a kind of a matter of debate anyway. The point that I think this starts with is the fact that people say AI can't be original or creative because it's just kind of copying. My kind of pushback on that is that these AI systems have basically ingested all of human knowledge and culture, And I actually think when you look at some output, it looks incredibly derivative, but actually we're already seeing signs of real meaningful creativity. And we're seeing that it is coming up with things that are truly inspirational or moving. You know, you can listen to AI generated music and it will do a kind of incredible copy of, say, Bach. And, you know, actually it's incredible. It sounds amazing, but it is just a copy. But actually, you can listen to some other AI generated music and it doesn't sound like anything that you've ever heard of. It sounds like something completely alien and new, that genuinely is expanding the possibility of what music can be in a way that, you know, we haven't really had a new genre of music in 20 years. It's something I've written about in a previous book. So I think we are seeing that AI systems can be inspirational, can be creative. After all, us human beings, when we are creative, we are just putting things together in new, unexpected ways. You know, we're not coming up with anything just completely out of the blue. And I think that is what we are now seeing AI doing. It doesn't need new information going into the loop because it's already got an insane amount of information in there. What it needs to do is just find the connections between them that aren't necessarily obvious. And that is something that is already there in some ways and is going to come even more.
Thank you. I think we probably only got time for 2 more questions. So Linda, I know we've touched on education a bit, but Phil had asked, how long do you think it will take the university to change its rules on assessment so the use of AI is embraced and not prescribed? It seems an inevitable change, like giving lectures in English rather than Latin, but how long do you think this might take?
It's not my job to speculate, but there have been conversations already. And I think there are some guidelines that actually try to set out what uses of AI are permissible. Either way, I think students have to declare whenever they used something like ChatGPT, but it's currently certainly not permissible for any kind of assessed work. I have no idea what the timeline is going to look like and how we're going to try to incorporate it. But some people try to be very creative with, you know, how they use assignments and potentially also how people will be assessed.
Thank you. And I just wonder whether this one would be appropriate for you as well, Linda, which is, have we lost sight of the fundamental question, should we be developing AI just because we can?
Good question. You sometimes certainly get the sense that given all the optimism about technology, there's a sense of we're doing this because we can and because that's really exciting. So to that extent, perhaps it's always really, really important to not lose sight of the distinction between means and ends, basically. So one of the things that Michael has emphasized is that AI could be an amazingly powerful tool. I think where things become dangerous is when we lose sight of that distinction of it being a tool versus somehow it becoming an end in itself that we, you know, pursue for its own sake. So I think in short, I would just say yes, absolutely. And that's why, again, doing philosophy can be a really exciting thing to do.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid we're not going to have time to finish all the rest of the questions. Thank you so much for all the ones that were given. I think that probably shows how interesting you both were and, you know, how this has been such a fascinating topic. So I'd really like to thank you both for coming along and giving up your time. Thank you to everybody who's also come to listen. I think there will be a recording available. Emily Bruce will be able to advise more on that if you needed to get in touch with her. But otherwise, thank you to everyone. Thanks for your time today. And there will be another TEDi Talk coming up at some point in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.